Hi, I'm Florence Ion, your consumer tech reporter here at Gizmodo, and I'm joined by a very special guest. Today we have Casey Fiesler, who you might know from TikTok. Hi, Casey.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining me. Casey, for those who don't know, is an associate professor of information science at the University of Colorado Boulder. And I found out about Casey through TikTok. Where I've talked about being on a lot because that's what happens, with TikTok. And you might have seen Casey's TikToks under the username Professor Casey. So Casey, I'm gonna tell people to follow you.
Thank you. Please
It's
do.
a quick account. You're in my algorithm, so everybody else should be on that track as well for us to be within parity, after all. So I actually wanted to have you here to talk about one of your latest TikToks and Twitter threads, which brought up some very, mm, very controversial news. So one thing that's particularly worrying us as users right now is how Netflix is planning to handle password sharing. So because they had those earnings that were not didn't make them very happy, they decided that the best way to sort of make up for some of that revenue is to start charging $3 per extra person that you add to your account. And from what I'm understanding, this is anybody that's added to your family or household, just terminology it's being used by streaming services. Right now, the limit is 4 people per family or household for Netflix at least. So, now password sharing is very common practice throughout streaming services. We've all done it. Casey, I know you and I have talked, separately, and you said you're not you're not doing it, I think, as much as some of us.
I personally am not, but I also held out for a really long time and only had a basic Netflix account, which actually doesn't have any extra screens anyway. Because I was like, I live alone. I don't need an extra screen. And so I didn't have one to share with people regardless.
Right. Well, I admittedly, and I've said this before publicly, I am on a shared Netflix account. Actually, my best friend pays for it because it gives access to my daughter who loves to watch the kids' content on there, however dubious it may be. So, somebody has to pay for it. I don't want to pay for it because I'm paying for so many other things already. And so this kind of got me worried. And so, Casey, you're a tech ethicist. Some might say that this is not a case of tech ethics, but when you and I were chatting, you kind of brought up a really good point that maybe this is. So, I kind of wanted to ask you if you could explain some of the conversations that have been happening in your TikTok regarding this upcoming change that they're currently testing in Latin American markets.
Yeah, so to clarify the actual change that they're making, so right now, different tiers of Netflix accounts allow you to have extra screens. And what an extra screen means is that people can be watching Netflix at the same time. And my assumption is that the way this was originally intended was like, you have a Netflix account for your family, and your kids can be upstairs watching Netflix, and here you are downstairs, and that's two screens. But what a lot of people have been doing is giving their Netflix login to a friend like you, and then they get to use that extra screen. So the change that Netflix is making is they are limiting it to a single household so that those two extra screens can only be the first scenario of like there's a kid upstairs as opposed to someone in a different household using it. And that's, I believe, the term that they're using. Um, so I made a TikTok about this because originally, when they talked about cracking down on account sharing, I was asking people about like the ethics of sharing passwords, and I was like, "Oh yeah, people are going to be really mad if they do this." So I made it. So I made a TikTok just basically explaining the change, and yeah, people are pretty mad. But what I thought was interesting were all of the different use cases that people brought up for why this is going to be bad. So college students was definitely the big one. So apparently
Yeah.
most college students stay on their parents' Netflix account. Um, but other situations were things like Spouses who travel for work for long periods of time. So it only kicks in after 2 weeks, they're saying, for one thing. If you like went on vacation and signed into your Netflix account, in an Airbnb or something, that should
Right.
be fine. But if it's for longer than 2 weeks, people also brought up like kids with divorced parents where they might be using a Netflix account at their dad's house and at their mom's house. Um, and some other kinds of similar situations having to do with travel and these kinds of things. And people are pretty upset about it.
I mean, I understand why. This didn't happen to me with Netflix, but when YouTube TV changed how they handle IP addresses, like you had to have a home location, it kind of it really upset the family sharing that I was doing with like my mom and my best friend who lives in another state. And that was a bummer because we were all watching 90 Day Fiancé together and nobody wants to pay for 90 Day Fiancé except me, apparently. Uh Whatever. One thing I noticed is that your comments, both the first TikTok that you posted, I think it was like earlier in July, and then the most recent one that you posted, I think last week, being us, we're in the month of August right now. There's a lot of pleas from folks that are like, "Oh my god, how is this going to affect me?" And I think there's also some general fear that if Netflix starts really adopting this and sees that they are going to be making money off of this, it's going to help the bottom line, that the other streaming services, of which there are so many more now than there were even a year ago, that they're going to start looking into this way of like extra monetizing. What could Netflix do you think, to kind of be like good stewards of streaming, whatever that might look like?
Um, I mean, one of the things is that I think they could get some goodwill by being a bit more transparent about what they're actually trying to crack
Yeah.
down on. Because the problem is
Yeah.
people immediately came up with all of these use cases that are very defensible and sympathetic, right? One example is a difference between Netflix and HBO Max, which is another really popular streaming service right now.
Mhm.
So they both have a similar kind of rule about extra profiles on your account, that it's not supposed to be like random people, except for Netflix says household and HBO Max says household and immediate family. And so that would actually solve the split families, the traveling spouses, the college student problem, just that one little change. Um, and if I had to guess, maybe Netflix will actually do something like that. But I think that if they do crack down on this in a way that people don't like, and I will say that many people in my comments are like, I'm canceling as soon as they do, like an extra $3.
I
It's
saw
too
that.
much. It
Yeah.
is, and I think it's almost more the principle of the thing than the $3, right? Like, I think if that happens and a lot of people leave Netflix, that other streaming services will see it as an opportunity to show some goodwill and not do similar kinds of things. But as you
Yep.
point out, if somehow this saved them, then maybe that would, I mean, I personally have trouble seeing how this could make a significant difference, because of how many people are
Yes.
saying, "Well, I don't need Netflix that much." So the idea would be that, so let's say that now the parents have to start paying an extra $3 for their college kid to use their Netflix, and they say, "No, I'm cracking down. Get your own Netflix." So Netflix making more money off of this situation relies on the assumption that the kid is going to pay for their own Netflix account as opposed to just pirating or whatever else they might decide to, or
Right.
stopping watching Netflix because there's so many other choices.
Right.
And I honestly have no idea. I mean, this is just based on the people in my comments, but they're like, there's nothing good on Netflix anymore anyway. Which
There
I
is
personally don't agree with, but
I mean, there are some really great things on Netflix. I mean, they did sort of really help usher in kind of this idea of of prestige streaming, right? Um, but I would argue that there's only so much that you can churn out to get people to stick around. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I feel like this is going to change the dichotomy a little bit of this particular industry and what we decide to pay for. I mean, this has even had me come around and say, like, do I need to be paying for all these things after all? Because I'm not actually watching everything.
I think you're right, and I think that now that we've like, I mean, it took a while, but we have settled into streaming as being the
Yeah.
current norm, and this is how things work. And a lot of people have cut the cord to cable, and this is the world now. And sharing accounts with people is the world now, right?
Yep.
And at some point, the platforms have to adjust to the world that is instead
Yes.
of trying to change
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I when we were talking earlier, I mentioned the example of music piracy and how a change that actually had a big impact on music piracy was iTunes. Um, because when
Oh,
I
yeah.
was in college, if you wanted to listen to a single song, the one good song on the otherwise bad album, you had to buy the entire CD, and no one wanted to do that. And
No.
so we were using Napster sometimes, not because we didn't want to pay for music, but because I really just want that one Donna Lewis song because no one has heard anything else on that album. And so when iTunes came along and allowed you to pay for a single song, some people stopped pirating because now there was a way to get music legally. And same thing with streaming. So
Yeah.
like now that there's a business model for streaming music, um, people stopped pirating music as much. And similar kind of thing now, if you give people ways to sort of legally share accounts, um, that's what they'll if, for some people will always some people just don't care and will
Yeah.
always not pay for things if they don't have to pay for them. But some people are happy to pay for things that they value.
This is correct, which might be why I perhaps pay for too many streaming services myself, because for I value these things. Um, because I value them, though, I kind of wanted to. My last question to you is about the actual like ethics of all this. Okay, so is it ethical to share your password for something that you pay for?
I think people would. So this is one of those tricky. Like there's
Yeah.
never right or wrong answers in ethics, right? So I mean, and actually, I'm reminded during my PhD, a lot of my research that I did about copyright, and I actually talked to a lot of people for one of my studies about piracy, and people would give me these very nuanced moral arguments. So, for example,
Yes.
well, I pirate Doctor Who because I can't get it in the United States until 6 months after it airs in the UK, and I will get spoiled otherwise. So I pirate it, but then later when it comes out on DVD, I'll buy it, right? So like those kinds of really nuanced moral arguments, and I can imagine very similar ones when it comes to password sharing.
Mhm.
Um, and but the law or the rules don't care about that kind
Yeah.
of nuance. And some people will tell you that breaking Netflix's terms of service, like using their platform in a way that they tell you not to, is itself unethical. But not everyone believes that, right?
Right.
Like that violating a platform's rules is unethical. So I don't really think there's an answer to that, but I do think that a lot of people recognize when they are doing something that is not ethical and sort of
Right.
are fine with that too. And
Right.
some people have a like it's never a problem to take money from big corporations and consider that to be an ethical stance. So it depends on who you ask, I think.
I think that's exactly the answer I was I was thinking you would give as well, because it is kind of one of those things. Well, I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for taking this time to chat with me about, oh god, streaming services.
You're very welcome. If people want to watch Netflix, I highly recommend Sandman. It was very good.
Okay, awesome.